They stole her last horse, then discovered the widow was the mountain ghost. Miriam lived alone in a small, quiet village tucked high in the mountains. Her house was simple, made of old stones and wood, and it sat at the edge of the forest where the trees grew thick and the air was always fresh, carrying the smell of pine and earth. She had been a widow for many years, and although the villagers were kind enough to check on her from time to time, she mostly kept to herself. Life had been hard, but she had learned to live with its difficulties, finding strength in small routines and the natural world around her. The one thing Miriam valued above all else was her last horse, a strong, brown mare named Luma. The horse had been her husband's gift long before he passed, and after so many years, it had become more than a pet. Luma was her companion, her helper, and her friend. Together, they navigated the steep mountain trails, crossed icy streams, and even carried supplies when Miriam went into the village or to gather firewood. The bond between the widow and her horse was deep, silent, and unbreakable. One chilly morning, Miriam woke up to find the world quieter than usual. There was a stillness in the air that made her uneasy, but she ignored it and moved toward the stable where Luma usually waited. Her heart stopped when she saw the empty space where the mare should have been. The gate was open and the ground showed fresh hoofprints leading away from the house. Miriam's first thought was disbelief. "No, not today," she whispered to herself. Her hands trembled slightly, but she quickly forced herself to stay calm. The villagers nearby had often warned her about thieves and wanderers who sometimes passed through the mountains, stealing what they could. Usually, Miriam had shrugged off these warnings, confident that her small home and remote location made theft unlikely. But now, standing alone in the stable, she realized her precautions were not enough. Someone had taken Luma. Miriam did not panic. Instead, she took a deep breath, steadying herself. She remembered every detail about the surrounding paths, the hills, and the hidden trails that only someone familiar with the mountains would know. She knew that whoever had taken her horse would not get far. Even the most cunning thief could not match her knowledge of these lands. The thieves, a small group of local men, had likely thought they were clever. They had never seen Miriam up close and probably assumed she was weak, just a lonely widow with no one to protect her. They laughed among themselves as they led Luma down a narrow path, unaware that someone was quietly following them. Miriam moved with a slow, careful step at first, making sure she stayed hidden behind rocks, trees, and shadows. Her presence was almost invisible, blending with the mountain itself. As she followed, memories of her husband came to her. She remembered how he had once told her, "The mountains will always protect you if you know them well." Now, those words gave her courage. She imagined his voice guiding her as she moved silently, every footstep measured, every sound controlled. Luma had always trusted her, and she would not let anyone harm the mare. The thieves had set a faster pace, trying to put distance between themselves and any potential followers. They spoke carelessly, joking about the widow and how easy it had been to steal her last horse. "She's just an old woman," one of them said. "She won't even notice for a day or two." Their laughter echoed through the valley, but Miriam's ears caught every word. She felt a quiet anger rising within her, not wild or uncontrolled, but sharp and focused. She would show them that age and solitude did not equal weakness. The path became steeper, and the forest grew thicker. Miriam carefully studied the tracks left behind by Luma's hooves and the men's boots. Her eyes were sharp, trained to notice the smallest detail. Broken twigs, disturbed leaves, and faint impressions in the mud all told her where they had gone. Sometimes, she had to take a longer, more difficult route to stay out of sight, climbing rocks and maneuvering through dense undergrowth. Yet she moved with surprising speed, her body remembering the years of labor and travel across these same mountains. As the day passed, the thieves began to grow tired. They stopped near a small stream, laughing and drinking, thinking they were safe. Miriam watched from a distance, hidden among the trees, and studied their movements. Her mind worked quickly. She did not need to confront them directly yet. Patience and planning were her allies, just as they had always been. The mountains themselves seemed to assist her, hiding her from view and giving her the advantage of surprise. While observing them, she also reflected on the stories the villagers had told about her. Some said she was the mountain ghost, a nickname born not of fear but of respect. They spoke of her uncanny ability to survive alone, to navigate treacherous paths, and to appear where no one expected her. At times, Miriam herself had chuckled at such stories. She knew she was no ghost, just a woman who had learned to rely on her own strength. But today, she realized that this reputation might serve her well. If the thieves feared the mountain ghost, they might make mistakes that would work to her advantage. The thieves eventually decided to camp for the night, choosing a sheltered spot near a cliff edge. They tied Luma to a tree, thinking she was secure, and made a small fire. Miriam watched from above, carefully calculating every move. She noted their positions, the way they interacted, and the directions in which they were most likely to travel. Each detail would matter when the time came to retrieve her horse. As the sun began to set, the shadows grew long, and the forest became quieter. Miriam remained hidden, feeling a strange calm settle over her. The anger she had felt earlier transformed into a steady focus. She thought about the long years she had spent alone, the hardships she had endured, and the lessons she had learned from living in the mountains. All of it had led to this moment. She was not just chasing a stolen horse. She was asserting her independence, her strength, and her connection to the land she had always called home. Night fell, and the stars emerged in the clear sky. The thieves, tired and careless, eventually fell asleep by their small fire. Miriam, still hidden, considered her options. She knew that a direct confrontation might be dangerous, but she also knew that she did not need to fight them head-on. With careful planning and clever tricks, she could retrieve Luma without putting herself at unnecessary risk. Her mind raced with ideas, each one more subtle and strategic than the last. By the time the moon was high, Miriam had made her decision. She would wait until the early hours when the thieves were in their deepest sleep, and then she would move. Her plan relied on silence, speed, and her deep understanding of the terrain. She was confident, not because she underestimated the thieves, but because she understood her own capabilities and the advantages that the mountains offered her. As she settled into a hidden spot to rest briefly before acting, Miriam felt a mixture of anticipation and determination. The chase had only just begun, but she knew that by sunrise, she would either have her horse back or learn an important lesson from the mountains. She felt a quiet strength in her chest, a reminder that age, solitude, and hardship had not weakened her. They had prepared her for this moment. In the stillness of the night, with the cold mountain air brushing against her face and the sounds of the forest surrounding her, Miriam waited. The thieves slept unaware, and the stars above watched silently. She was ready for what was to come. And somewhere deep in the mountains, the legend of the mountain ghost quietly stirred, unseen but very real. Miriam waited in silence as the night deepened. The thieves' fire flickered weakly, and their muffled snores drifted through the valley. She could see them clearly from her hidden spot atop a small ridge, yet they remained completely unaware of her presence. Every muscle in her body was tense, ready to act, but her mind remained calm. Years of living in the mountains had taught her that patience was often more powerful than haste. She watched the thieves closely, studying how they had tied Luma. The horse stood quietly, but Miriam could see the tension in her movements. She knew Luma trusted her and would respond the moment she approached. The widow thought about the safest path to reach her horse without startling the thieves. A direct approach could provoke them, but if she used the terrain wisely, she could retrieve Luma quietly and vanish before anyone knew what happened. The moon cast pale light across the valley, illuminating rocks, trees, and the faint trail the thieves had followed earlier. Miriam remembered every step of that path, every hidden nook, every natural cover the mountains offered. It was as if the mountains themselves were on her side, guiding her through their familiar contours. With each careful breath, she felt more confident. She had survived avalanches, icy streams, and wild animals alone. Stealing back her horse from a group of men, though dangerous, was something she could handle. Miriam waited for the thieves to fall into their deepest sleep. She could hear the faint crackle of the dying fire and the soft movements of the men as they shifted uncomfortably in their makeshift bedding. The forest was quiet, only interrupted by distant calls of nocturnal animals. Everything was in her favor if she moved carefully. Slowly she descended from the ridge, stepping lightly over rocks and fallen branches. Her movements were deliberate, almost ghost-like, and she made sure no sound gave away her position. As she approached the thieves' camp, Miriam studied the horse's rope. It was tied in a simple knot, not too tight but secure enough that an inexperienced hand could not untie it without being noticed. She smiled faintly. She knew how to undo such knots quickly, a skill her husband had taught her long ago. With gentle fingers she worked on the rope, careful to avoid sudden movements that could awaken Luma or the men. The horse sensed her presence immediately. Even in the darkness, Luma lifted her head, her ears flicking toward the sound of Miriam's soft movements. Miriam whispered to her, low and comforting, "It's okay, Luma, I'm here, we're leaving." The mare's muscles relaxed slightly and Miriam's confidence grew. She knew the horse trusted her completely, and that trust would help them escape unnoticed. Just as she was about to untie the last part of the rope, a branch snapped nearby. One of the thieves shifted in his sleep, turning his head toward the sound. Miriam froze, holding her breath. The thief muttered something in his sleep and settled again, but Miriam's heart pounded. She had learned long ago that a single mistake could cost dearly in the mountains. She waited until every sound returned to stillness before resuming her work. The rope finally came loose, and Miriam gently led Luma away from the fire. The mare moved cautiously at first, sensing the danger, but Miriam guided her quietly, whispering soft reassurances. They stepped carefully over rocks and roots, avoiding the areas illuminated by the dying firelight. Slowly, they made their way toward a hidden path Miriam knew well, a narrow trail that would lead them out of the valley without crossing the thieves' line of sight. The thieves remained asleep, oblivious to the careful escape happening just meters away. Miriam felt a small thrill of satisfaction but did not allow herself to relax. She knew the night was not yet over. The mountains could be treacherous, and one wrong step could cause injury or alert the thieves. She led Luma through the narrow path, moving silently, her eyes scanning for any potential dangers. After a short while, they reached a rocky outcrop that overlooked the valley. From there, Miriam could see the thieves' fire still flickering below. She paused, taking a deep breath. They were not far, but she had gained enough distance to plan the next stage of their escape. Luma nickered softly, sensing their progress and ready to continue. Miriam patted her gently. "Almost there," she whispered. "Just a little further." The path ahead was more difficult. Steep slopes and loose stones made every step dangerous, but Miriam's familiarity with the terrain gave her confidence. She knew which rocks were stable and which were likely to shift. She tested each step carefully, helping Luma navigate tricky spots, and used her body weight to maintain balance. Her experience in the mountains was evident in every movement, calm, precise, and careful. As they moved, Miriam thought about the thieves. They had underestimated her completely. They assumed she was a helpless widow, unable to track them or reclaim her property. Little did they know that their ignorance had put them in the exact position she wanted. By following them quietly, observing their habits, and waiting for the right moment, she had gained the advantage without confrontation. Her mind replayed the moment she first noticed the theft, and a quiet determination settled in her chest. She would not let anyone take what belonged to her. Hours passed, and the sky began to lighten slightly, signaling the approach of dawn. Miriam and Luma continued their careful journey, using shadows and natural cover to avoid being seen. The thieves, still asleep in their camp, remained unaware of the near-miraculous disappearance of their prize. Miriam allowed herself a brief moment to smile, knowing that Luma's freedom was almost secured. Finally, they reached a narrow ridge that led back toward the village. From this vantage point, Miriam could see the rooftops of nearby houses and the faint trails that villagers used daily. She slowed her pace, making sure Luma remained calm and quiet. The mare moved steadily, trusting Miriam completely, and together they descended the ridge. Every step brought them closer to safety, and Miriam's heart swelled with relief. As they entered a denser part of the forest near the village, Miriam paused again. She could hear birds beginning to stir with the morning and the faint sounds of villagers starting their day. It was a reminder that life in the mountains continued, and that she had managed to navigate the night without confrontation. Her plan had worked perfectly. She had used patience, intelligence, and her knowledge of the terrain to outmaneuver the thieves. When they finally emerged near the outskirts of the village, Miriam guided Luma to a familiar path leading home. The sun was rising, casting golden light over the mountains and valleys. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel triumph. The horse was safe, and she had proven, once again, that the widow of the mountains was not to be underestimated. Villagers who saw her later in the day would whisper among themselves about how Miriam and her horse had reappeared as if by magic. They would say she was the mountain ghost, a name that now carried both fear and admiration. Miriam returned home with Luma, carefully closing the stable door and giving the mare a gentle pat. She let out a deep breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The night had been tense and dangerous, but they had made it safely. For Miriam, the experience was not just about retrieving a horse. It was a reaffirmation of her strength, resilience, and deep connection to the mountains. As she settled down that morning, preparing a small breakfast and cleaning Luma, Miriam knew that the thieves had learned a lesson they would never forget. They had underestimated a woman who had spent her life mastering the mountains, and their arrogance had nearly cost them dearly. In the quiet of her home, Miriam allowed herself to smile, thinking that perhaps some legends, like that of the mountain ghost, were rooted in truth after all. The story of the chase would soon spread through the village and beyond. Whispers of the widow's cunning and courage would grow into tales of mystery and admiration. Yet for Miriam, it was simply another day in a life lived with intelligence, patience, and courage. She had faced danger, and she had emerged victorious, not through brute force, but through calm determination and careful planning. The widow and her horse rested that day, the mountains standing silently around them, witnesses to the quiet power of a woman who refused to be underestimated. And though the thieves would remember their encounter with fear, Miriam knew that life in the mountains continued as it always had, difficult, beautiful, and entirely hers. Miriam and Luma had made it safely back toward the edges of the valley, but the widow knew that the danger was not over. The thieves were still nearby, though now disoriented from the night and unaware that their stolen horse had vanished. Miriam could see the faint smoke of their fire in the distance, curling into the morning sky. She paused for a moment, watching them carefully. Every step she had taken had been calculated, but now it was time for the final move. She crouched low behind a rock, observing the thieves as they stirred awake. Some rubbed their eyes, still groggy from sleep. Others muttered complaints about being cold or stiff, their voices rough and tired. They had grown careless, assuming that the horse was still tied nearby. Miriam's lips curved into a faint, determined smile. She knew they would soon search the area, and that was exactly what she had been waiting for. The morning air was crisp, carrying the sounds of the forest. the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, and the trickle of a small stream. Miriam let her eyes follow the thieves as they moved toward the valley floor, muttering to each other and searching for signs of Luma. Their movements were clumsy and panicked compared to her calm precision. She felt a rush of satisfaction, but she remained silent, knowing that the right moment for action had not yet arrived. Using her knowledge of the terrain, Miriam moved silently along the ridge above the thieves. She stayed hidden in patches of shrub and behind rocks, keeping just enough distance to remain unseen, but close enough to control the situation. Every instinct she had developed over years of living in the mountains guided her. The thieves had assumed they were in control, but the widow was about to show them how wrong they were. She watched them grow frustrated as they failed to find any trace of the horse. One of the thieves shouted, blaming the others for letting her escape. "She must have let the horse go," he said angrily. "She's too weak to chase us." The others argued back, their voices rising in panic. Miriam's patience held firm. She knew that fear and confusion were far more powerful tools than any confrontation. The widow had noticed a small path leading from the valley floor toward a denser part of the forest. It was narrow, almost hidden, and would allow her to approach the thieves without being seen. Carefully, she guided Luma along this hidden trail, making sure the horse stayed calm. The mare's trust in Miriam was complete, and she followed silently, her hooves barely making a sound on the soft earth. Miriam planned to use clever tricks rather than direct force. She had learned long ago that the mountains themselves could be an ally if used wisely. Loose stones, fallen branches, and the natural contours of the land could be used to create confusion and delay. She nudged Luma along, keeping the horse just out of sight of the thieves while preparing for the moment when she would make her presence known. The thieves, meanwhile, were growing more reckless. One of them spotted a faint track in the mud and shouted, pointing toward the forest. "Over here, I saw something move." Panic spread among them as they realized they had underestimated the widow. They began moving quickly, but their haste made them careless. Each step they took brought them closer to the traps Miriam had silently planned. Miriam used the cover of trees and rocks to stay hidden, watching their reactions. She dropped a few small stones strategically, just enough to make the thieves pause and look around. Their anxiety grew with every small sound. Miriam whispered softly to Luma, encouraging the horse to remain calm. The mare's steady presence helped Miriam maintain control of the situation, giving her the confidence to continue her plan. The thieves split up, each one trying to find a way to retrieve the horse. This was exactly what Miriam had hoped for. Alone, they were vulnerable, and she knew she could manage each one without confrontation. She moved closer unseen, guiding Luma along a path that would allow her to appear suddenly if needed. Every step was deliberate, every movement measured, and every sound controlled. Finally, Miriam reached a point where she could make herself seen. She stepped from behind a rock, her presence calm but commanding. "Looking for something?" she asked, her voice steady and firm. The thieves froze, staring at her in disbelief. She stood there, tall and composed, with Luma by her side. They had expected an old widow to be weak, but what they saw instead was a woman who had survived the mountains for years, strong and unafraid. One of the thieves laughed nervously, trying to appear confident. "It's just you. Where's the horse?" he demanded. Miriam smiled slightly, her eyes never leaving him. "The horse is safe," she replied calmly, "and I suggest you leave this place before you get hurt." Her voice had a quiet authority that made them hesitate. The other thieves tried to advance, but Miriam's gaze did not waver. She had no need to strike. Her presence alone, combined with the terrain and the advantage she held, was enough to make them cautious. The widow had learned long ago that fear and respect often achieved more than anger or force. She shifted slightly, positioning herself and Luma in a way that made escape difficult for anyone foolish enough to approach. Panic finally overtook them. They realized that the woman they had underestimated was far more capable than they had imagined. One by one, they began retreating, stumbling over roots and rocks in their haste to get away. Miriam watched carefully, letting them make mistakes without needing to intervene physically. Her plan had worked perfectly. Intelligence, patience, and knowledge of the land had given her the upper hand. As the thieves disappeared into the forest, Miriam guided Luma back along the safe path toward the village. The mare's hooves moved steadily, trusting the woman who had saved her once again. Miriam allowed herself a small moment of relief, knowing that Luma was safe and that the danger had passed. She also knew, however, that the story of the thieves would spread quickly, and her actions would become part of the village's tales of the mysterious widow. When they finally reached the edge of the village, Miriam paused to let Luma drink from a small stream. The horse nuzzled her gently, a quiet display of gratitude and trust. Miriam stroked Luma's mane, feeling the bond between them grow even stronger. They had faced danger together and emerged unscathed, relying on each other and the mountains that had shaped their lives. By the time villagers saw Miriam and Luma returning, rumors had already begun to spread. Some claimed they had glimpsed a shadow moving through the forest at night, leading the horse silently. Others whispered about a mountain ghost, protecting the lands and punishing those who dared steal from her. Miriam smiled quietly, knowing that legend and reality often intertwined in the mountains, but she cared little for the stories. Her priority had always been survival, and today she had succeeded. The thieves never returned to the area. Whether frightened by their own experience or by the stories they spread, they had learned a lesson in respect and caution. Miriam had reclaimed her horse without violence, relying instead on patience, intelligence, and a deep understanding of her environment. She had shown that true strength did not always come from force, but from calm thinking, skill, and courage. Miriam spent the rest of the day ensuring that Luma was safe and comfortable. She repaired the stable, checked the fences, and prepared a warm meal for herself. She reflected on the night's events, grateful for her knowledge of the mountains and for the trust she shared with her horse. Each challenge she faced had made her stronger, and she understood that her life in the mountains, though difficult, had prepared her for moments like this. By evening, the village had settled into its normal rhythm, but whispers of the widow's daring actions continued to circulate. People spoke in awe of how she had outsmarted the thieves and safely returned her horse. Miriam listened quietly to the stories, smiling faintly. She knew that her actions were not magic or supernatural. They were the result of patience, skill, and determination, but she did not mind if others believed differently. Sometimes, a legend could be just as powerful as reality. As night fell, Miriam and Luma rested together in the stable, the events of the day settling into memory. The widow had faced danger, used her mind and experience to overcome it, and protected what mattered most to her. She knew that challenges would come again, as they always did in the mountains, but she also knew that she had the strength and intelligence to meet them. The story of the thieves and the mountain ghost would remain, a reminder to others that underestimating someone who truly knows her land and her own strength could lead to consequences they were not prepared for. The mountain stood silently around Miriam, witness to her courage and wisdom. She had proven that age, solitude, and experience could be as powerful as any weapon. Luma rested beside her, calm and trusting, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The widow had faced the thieves and emerged victorious, not by violence, but by skill, patience, and courage, a true testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of danger. The morning after the night of the chase, the village buzzed with quiet excitement and curiosity. Word had already spread that Miriam and her horse had returned safely, though few knew the full details. Some villagers had seen a shadow moving through the trees late at night and assumed it was the mountain ghost in action. Others heard strange noises from the valley and were convinced that something mysterious had taken place. By midday, the story had grown, shifting and stretching like wildfire, fueled by imagination and awe. Miriam herself moved calmly through the village, leading Luma along the familiar paths. She greeted a few neighbors who looked at her with a mixture of respect and surprise. Some whispered to each other, glancing at the widow who had just outwitted the thieves. "Did you see her last night?" one woman asked her friend. "She appeared out of nowhere like she belongs to the mountains themselves." Miriam said nothing, offering only a polite smile. She cared little for gossip. What mattered was that she and Luma were safe, and that the lesson had been learned by those who had underestimated her. By late morning, villagers who had missed the sight of her returning gathered near the edge of the village to catch a glimpse. Stories circulated. Some claimed the thieves had run screaming into the forest, chased by an invisible force. Others said the widow had appeared as a shadow in the moonlight, reclaiming her horse as if by magic. Miriam moved past the crowd quietly, but she could hear the whispers, and a small smile tugged at her lips. Perhaps the nickname Mountain Ghost had been given in jest long ago, but now it carried a weight of truth in the eyes of the villagers. The thieves themselves became a source of conversation and rumor. Though most had left the area in fear, a few had returned later, timidly, to share their version of events with outsiders. Their story was exaggerated with every telling. They spoke of a pale, silent woman who appeared from the shadows, moving with uncanny speed and precision, capable of feats they could not understand. Some of their tales suggested that the widow had eyes that could see in the dark, that she knew every twist of the mountain paths, and that her horse was somehow able to anticipate every movement. The villagers listened with awe, adding their own details to the legend. Miriam was aware of these stories, though she never confirmed or denied them. She had lived long enough to know that people enjoyed tales of the extraordinary, and she did not mind letting the mountain ghost live in the imaginations of others. To her, the truth was simple. The mountains had taught her, patience had guided her, and her intelligence had ensured her safety. Everything else, the fear, the legend, the awe, was beyond her concern. The elders of the village, who had always respected Miriam for her resilience, began to speak more openly about her skills. They recalled how she had survived blizzards alone, climbed treacherous cliffs, and navigated dense forests when others would have turned back. "She is part of these mountains," one elder said to another. "She knows them better than anyone. That is her true power." Others nodded, agreeing that her cleverness and courage were what had kept her and Luma safe all these years. As the day progressed, Miriam took Luma to the stable and cared for her with careful attention. She cleaned the horse's hooves, brushed her coat, and prepared food and water. Luma, sensing the calm from Miriam, stood quietly, nuzzling her gently. The mare had been through a stressful night, and Miriam knew the importance of tending to her companion. This quiet moment, caring for the horse she loved, reminded her that courage and vigilance were not only about facing danger, but also about nurturing what mattered most. Meanwhile, the story of the widow's bravery reached nearby villages. Travelers passing through told the tale, embellishing details with every retelling. They spoke of Miriam as a woman who could vanish into the mountains, who had outsmarted thieves without raising her voice, and who had an almost mystical connection with the land. The legend grew with every conversation, blending fact and imagination, until Miriam herself became larger than life in the eyes of the people. Despite the growing reputation, Miriam remained humble and grounded. She walked through her village as she always had, tending her home, caring for Luma, and observing the mountains that had shaped her life. The villagers continued to watch her with respect, and some approached her for advice, particularly young women seeking guidance on navigating the wilderness. Miriam shared her knowledge patiently, teaching them how to read trails, identify dangers, and move safely through the forests. Her experience became a valuable resource, and she realized that part of the legend of the mountain ghost could serve a practical purpose, helping others survive and thrive in the rugged terrain. By late afternoon, a few villagers approached her with offers of assistance, wishing to help repair the stable or strengthen the fences. Miriam accepted their help graciously, but insisted that Luma remained hers and that she needed no permanent protection. "I know these mountains," she said softly. "I have always managed on my own, and I will continue to do so. But I appreciate your concern." The villagers respected her independence, recognizing that her strength was both her own and inseparable from the land she had called home for so many years. As the sun began to set, Miriam stood outside her home, watching the orange and pink hues spread across the peaks. She thought about the events of the past night, the thieves, and the way the mountains had guided her. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she had acted with intelligence, patience, and courage. She did not need recognition, but the villagers' respect and the growing legend of the mountain ghost were a reminder that true strength leaves its mark, whether through stories or deeds. Even the thieves, far from the village now, carried the memory of their encounter. They spoke in hushed tones about the widow who had outsmarted them and the horse that had vanished from their grasp. Their fear and confusion became part of the local narrative, a cautionary tale to others who might think to steal or disrespect the widow. Miriam's actions had created more than just a legend. They had established a boundary that no one would dare cross again. The night fell quietly, and Miriam lit a small lamp inside her home. She prepared a simple meal and reflected on the lessons of the day. Courage, she thought, was not just about facing immediate danger. It was about preparation, patience, and understanding the tools at one's disposal. Her knowledge of the mountains, her bond with Luma, and her calm, deliberate actions had ensured success. The thieves had been defeated, not through force, but through intelligence and composure. In the days that followed, villagers continued to share stories of the widow's cleverness and bravery. Children whispered tales of the mountain ghost who could appear and disappear at will. Young men and women spoke of the woman who had bested thieves without striking a blow. Miriam, however, went about her life quietly, tending to her home, riding through the mountains and caring for Luma. She did not need the legend to validate her actions. Her own understanding of her abilities was enough. Miriam's reputation as the mountain ghost grew beyond her village, reaching travelers, merchants, and even neighboring towns. People began to seek her guidance when navigating the mountains or traveling through the area. Her calm demeanor, sharp mind, and deep knowledge of the land made her an invaluable source of wisdom. The story of the stolen horse had become a lesson in respect, courage, and intelligence, and Miriam's example served as inspiration to many who faced challenges in life. By the end of the week, the villagers treated her with renewed admiration. They no longer whispered only out of fear, they whispered out of respect. Miriam's life continued much as it had before, but now with a subtle acknowledgement of her capabilities and the legend she had become. The widow, once quietly living at the edge of the mountains, had transformed into a symbol of resilience and cunning. Her actions had proven that knowledge, patience, and courage were often more powerful than brute strength. As Miriam prepared for another night in her home, she looked out at the mountains, feeling a deep sense of connection and gratitude. The land had taught her, protected her, and allowed her to reclaim what was hers without harming anyone. Luma nuzzled her gently, and the bond between them felt stronger than ever. The widow had not only survived the ordeal but had emerged from it with her reputation, her horse, and her dignity intact. In the quiet of the night, Miriam understood that legends are born from truth, skill, and courage. She had become the mountain ghost, not because of magic, but because of her unmatched understanding of the land, her patience, and her fearless determination. The thieves had learned their lesson, the villagers had learned theirs, and Miriam had reaffirmed her place in the mountains. a woman who could survive, protect, and inspire, all without ever needing to shout or strike a blow. Life in the village returned to its quiet rhythm, but Miriam's story had left a lasting mark on everyone. The villagers spoke her name with a mixture of admiration and awe. Travelers passing through mentioned the mountain ghost, who had outsmarted thieves and protected her horse. Children whispered about her as if she were a hero from their favorite tales, and adults treated her with newfound respect. Miriam, however, continued her life simply, quietly, and without seeking attention. Her pride lay not in the stories told about her, but in knowing she had done what was right. Miriam spent her mornings riding Luma through the mountain trails, checking on the streams, gathering firewood, and ensuring that no danger threatened the village or its surrounding lands. The mare was lively and strong, as if sensing her owner's energy and confidence. Together they became a familiar sight, the widow and her horse moving gracefully along cliffs and through forests, always calm, always careful. People began to notice that no one dared trouble her anymore. Even those with past mischief in mind avoided the paths she often traveled. Miriam's reputation had become a shield, protecting her and her horse without a single act of aggression. Despite her growing legend, Miriam remained humble. She never boasted about her cleverness or the events of the night the thieves had tried to steal Luma. Instead, she focused on helping others whenever she could. If a traveler was lost in the mountains, she would guide them to safety. If a villager needed advice about navigating difficult terrain, she would show them the safest paths. Miriam realized that the same knowledge and courage that had saved her horse could also help others survive and thrive. Her life became a blend of quiet independence and thoughtful guidance, a balance that left a lasting impression on everyone around her. The thieves' story continued to spread. Some villagers had heard rumors that the men had tried to return later, thinking they could take the horse again, only to turn back in fear. Others said they had moved to distant towns, unwilling to risk another encounter with the widow of the mountains. Miriam never sought revenge or confrontation. The thieves' fear alone ensured that they would not return. The lesson had been learned without violence, and that was exactly the outcome she desired. The legend of the mountain ghost grew beyond her village, reaching neighboring towns and travelers who passed through the mountains. People began to speak of Miriam not only as a clever and courageous woman, but also as a symbol of resilience and independence. Young women in particular admired her skill and determination. Some sought her guidance, wanting to learn how to navigate the wilderness safely, how to care for horses, and how to survive in challenging conditions. Miriam shared her wisdom generously, teaching practical lessons while subtly passing on the values of patience, courage, and intelligence. Over time, Miriam became more than just a widow or a local figure. She became a symbol of strength for the entire region. People told stories of her silent courage, her careful planning, and the way she had reclaimed her horse from thieves without a fight. Travelers would repeat these stories to others, often adding small embellishments, but the heart of the story remained true. Miriam had faced danger, thought clearly, and protected what mattered most to her. Her actions inspired others to trust their own intelligence and resilience, showing them that even in difficult circumstances, careful thinking and courage could overcome seemingly impossible challenges. Even within her own village, Miriam's influence grew. Villagers came to her for guidance on matters that went beyond survival in the mountains. Her advice on planning, decision-making, and problem-solving became valued as much as her knowledge of the terrain. The quiet widow who had once lived at the edge of the village had transformed into a respected figure whose counsel was sought by many. And yet, despite her growing reputation, Miriam remained approachable, always ready to lend a helping hand or a listening ear. Miriam's life continued to follow a rhythm shaped by the mountains. Each day, She rode Luma through familiar trails, checking the land, ensuring safety, and quietly observing the changes in nature and village life. She had learned that vigilance and care were essential, not only for survival but for the well-being of those she cared about. Her connection with Luma remained strong, and the bond between them deepened with every shared experience. The horse had become more than a companion. Luma was a partner in the widow's quiet adventures, a loyal friend who had shared in her courage and resourcefulness. As years passed, Miriam noticed a subtle shift in how the younger generation viewed her. Children grew up hearing the story of the widow and her horse, learning lessons about courage, patience, and respect for the land. Young men and women who might have once underestimated her now sought her advice, listening carefully to her instructions on how to move safely in the mountains or deal with unexpected dangers. The widow's experience and wisdom became a form of education for the community, shaping how future generations understood resilience and careful thinking. Despite her legendary status, Miriam remained grounded. She never allowed herself to be carried away by pride or the stories told about her. She knew that true strength was quiet, practical, and unassuming. She continued to focus on daily tasks, caring for Luma, tending to her home, and helping others when needed. Her actions, not her words, inspired respect and admiration. In a world that often celebrated loud or aggressive displays of power, Miriam's calm intelligence and quiet courage stood as a powerful example of a different kind of strength, one rooted in patience, wisdom, and skill. In the evenings, Miriam would sit outside her home, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The golden light reflected off the cliffs and trees, creating shadows that danced across the valley. She often thought about the night the thieves had tried to steal Luma and the way the mountains had guided her to success. That night had been a turning point, not only for her reputation but for her understanding of herself and the world around her. It had proven that careful thinking, courage, and patience could overcome fear and danger, and that true power often lay in intelligence rather than force. The villagers continued to share stories of Miriam's deeds, each retelling reinforcing her status as the mountain ghost. But for Miriam, the legend was secondary. What mattered was the life she had built, the lessons she had learned, and the safety and well-being of Luma and the land around her. She had faced danger, protected what she loved, and emerged stronger and wiser. Her actions had inspired others, not through fear, but through example, showing that calm determination, skill, and courage were qualities that could carry anyone through even the most difficult challenges. As the years went by, Miriam's influence on the village and surrounding area remained strong. People continued to admire her for her intelligence, bravery, and wisdom. Travelers sought her guidance. Young villagers looked to her as a role model, and the story of the widow and her horse became part of the oral history of the mountains. Miriam, however, remained humble, living simply, caring for Luma, and quietly ensuring that the land and people around her were safe. Miriam's legacy was not built on fear or intimidation, but on respect, intelligence, and careful action. The mountain ghost was no longer just a tale whispered in the shadows. She had become a real example of how courage and wisdom could shape a life and inspire a community. Her story reminded everyone that even in solitude, a person could achieve great things through patience, careful planning, and deep understanding of their surroundings. Even in her later years, Miriam continued to ride through the mountains, guiding travelers, teaching young villagers, and caring for Luma. Her strength and independence remained evident in every movement, every decision, and every interaction. People who witnessed her actions understood that her legend was not just a story. It was a reflection of a life lived with skill, courage, and quiet determination. The thieves never returned, and the cautionary tale of their encounter with Miriam spread far and wide. Others in the region learned that underestimating her was a mistake, and the mountains themselves seemed to protect her and Luma. The widow had not only reclaimed her horse, but had also reclaimed respect, security, and the admiration of those around her. Through intelligence, patience, and courage, Miriam had turned a moment of danger into a story of triumph that would be remembered for generations. In the quiet of the evening, Miriam often reflected on her journey. The mountains had taught her lessons about resilience, patience, and understanding the world. Luma stood beside her, calm and loyal, a reminder of the trust and bond that had guided them through challenges. Miriam knew that her life had become intertwined with the land, the people, and the stories told about her. She had proven that even a single person, guided by intelligence, courage, and careful action, could shape their destiny and leave a lasting impact. And so, the widow of the mountains continued her life with quiet dignity, courage, and wisdom. The legend of the mountain ghost lived on, not as a tale of fear, but as a story of survival, intelligence, and bravery. Miriam had faced danger, reclaimed what was hers, and become an inspiration for everyone who heard her story. Through her actions, she left a legacy that would endure long after her time, proving that true strength is measured not by force, but by courage, intelligence, and the ability to act wisely in the face of challenge.